So now, the economic impact of this pandemic on Ethiopian economy as a whole. So the main point here is that this pandemic uh, is and will further along the timeline cause a stunt in Ethiopia's economic growth and its GDP growth. So the IMF, which will prevent many of its developmental objectives in the long run. So the IMF slashed the GDP growth prediction from 6.2% to 3.2. And there's already a report of 104 million 100 sorry 1.4 million people unemployed in Ethiopia. With the number has probably grew from now, and it's important to know that many of work Ethiopian workers are in the shadow economy. So certain illegal workers that are not in an informal sector, which is not regarded in these employment statistics. And many factories and industrial sites are being closed, and that disincentivizes FDI. Sounded like over there. Tourism, which is 10% of the Ethiopian GDP, has been suspended. So Ethiopian Airlines, which has become truly a national pride over the years, as well as access, as well as Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, it has become the diplomatic capital of Africa. Not possible anymore. Fall in remittances, although not too drastic, because many Ethiopians have already returned home following Ethiopia's reforms. Um, Another key crucial aspect here is the supply chains in the global market. So there has been an increase in imports of raw material, like metal, which are vital, and garments, which are vital for manufacturing sector, and this makes Ethiopia's transition to a manufactured good economy, exporting economy, that more difficult, and it will probably prolong this transition period for sure. So the positive here, sorry, still a few negatives. Agricultural sector faces huge losses currently due to the locust invasion. There is a fall in exports of horticulture products, garments, raw materials such as coffees, oil seeds, and some commodities are just at a standstill in the global market. So there's basically no demand as of now. So even if goods are able to move around within the Ethiopian border, a lot of exports is at a standstill, has been halted. So the disruption of food supply chains due to the lockdown measures can aggravate Ethiopia's food insecurity, and Ethiopia has a historically low amount of foreign reserve, which makes it more reliant on the generosity of other countries to donate medical supplies, which is a huge issue in terms of actually properly combating the virus, as many countries are in dire need of medical supplies right now, and not having foreign capital to pay for it is an obstacle. So the key takeaways, how I would evaluate what the government needs to do. So the government needs to stabilize the supply chains to alleviate the economic pressure, and it may do so via stimulus packages, looser fiscal policies, and etc. And I also believe that the creativity of the private sector may help the Ethiopian government to reorganize its supply chains and logistics. So it basically, if they ensure uh, a new safer movement of goods, where small businesses can still operate and deliver goods on a safer measure, this will definitely help alleviate some of the stress on the economy. However, a huge obstacle is less than 15% of Ethiopians have access to internet, and just purely from my perspective, how am I supporting small businesses today in Kiev, Ukraine? Well, I am ordering food from either, whether it's Uber Eats, which is actually closing in Kiev, new news here, Mr. Edmonds, or Glovo. Um, and thus I support small businesses, small restaurant owners, small business restaurant owners, and I also support in cosmetics industries, for example, some other days. So I am going to purchase a perfume from a local retailer here, once again supporting business. However, I am doing this all in the comfort of my home and through digital means. And in Africa and in Ethiopia, that is far from the reality. So it definitely complicates this potential solution that many other countries have chosen. Um, and and the consumption of goods largely occurs in open markets, as I've mentioned, and therefore heavy government regulation is needed. So lockdown restrictions, as far as I've read, are simply impractical in Ethiopia. So it is important to have a greater awareness campaign. Even Prime Minister Abiy said it's impractical to impose lockdown measures because A, first of all, many people don't even have homes. B, the disobedience of people. C, the rural communities and internally displaced people. Therefore, it is mandatory, imperative to have a greater awareness program. For example, South Africa, along with NGO partners, has been very vocal in its programs um, for raising comparison. So they've been giving out, obviously wearing a mask. They've been walking. They've been giving out leaflets. They've been talking to local communities and basically telling people the true dangers of this deadly virus. And I believe it's something many nations can adapt to from prior experience from dealing with deadly outbreaks like the Ebola. Um, Moving on, reliance on agrarian production is actually a promiseful aspect. So this is why it's positive. Finally, some silver lining uh, because after two harvests seasons, this locust problem is likely to be solved. The agrarian sector will recover quicker than other areas, and it will grow in demand. Therefore, it is a positive here. So the government policies should also take into account the informal sector, as they are largely left out of statistics and are deeply affected. So if there are economic packages or stimulus packages or tax cuts, it's important to think of some strategy that would take account for the informal sector. So Ethiopia will struggle to decrease its inflation rate. So unfortunately, I don't see what the Ethiopian government can really do here, as there will be an obvious trade-off. But it has uh, tighter fiscal and monetary policies are not practical amidst this pandemic because there is already a decreased consumption. You don't want the economy to fall into an even greater depression. We're also talking in the context of a global recession, so that is just not an option. So cancellation of debt is mandatory, and thankfully we've seen progress there. And I believe there should be a new credit of generation for physical economic growth because developing nations they have low fiscal and monetary space. To like developing nations are using these measures and are handing out. I've seen in countries like Spain they've issued a universal basic income uh, for its citizens. U.S. is basically in a lot of basically a lot of government spending is coming in with those stimulus packages, trillions of U.S. dollars. Uh, and this is not the reality for developing nations. So a lot of this money will have to come from foreign creditors. So countries like Ethiopia can invest into long-lasting medical infrastructure and various other projects it needs to tackle this pandemic. This will be all. This is my last assignment for IB economics class, and I'm a bit teary. It was actually a very interesting course, so I want to thank you, Mr. Edmonds, for the time you've dedicated to our class. And in the end, I've managed to learn a lot, and this is actually a subject I now aspire to in my further studies. Uh, and I just want to thank you for all the lectures, especially interesting methods of learning at the boards, interacting with my classmates. A lot of this actually helped me drill some of the information in my brain, and the way we also went over papers. Unfortunately, I might not take the IB exam. Maybe and also unfortunately, maybe I might have to retake it. No, I will take it for the first time. But in any case, I'm ready. So I thank you, Mr. Edmonds, and stay safe. Thank you for watching.